All right, so today we're diving deep, really deep into one of those books, the ones that are infamous for a reason. Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf.
A book that really lays bare. I mean, it gets right to the heart of his political and racial worldview.
And it's heavy stuff, not exactly light reading,
Definitely not.
but it's essential if we want to understand, the ideas behind one of the, darkest chapters in history.
I think that's right.
Right.
And our goal here, we're going to dissect this thing carefully, really trying to explore the historical and ideological context.
Right, analyze, not advocate.
Right, exactly. Okay, so just for some background, Mein Kampf is split into two parts. The first part was written in 1924 while Hitler was, in prison.
Yeah.
And the second part came later in 1926.
Okay.
And he covers a lot of ground in this book. I mean, his early years in Vienna, his experiences in World War I, and the whole development of the Nazi Party. He really tries to lay out his whole, worldview. Yeah. And one of the most revealing parts, at least for me, is where he talks about his time in Vienna. He actually calls it his school of life.
Interesting.
He saw the city, it was very diverse back then.
Right.
He saw that as a weakness, like a sign of decay in the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Mm.
And this is where we really start to see, those deep-seated beliefs about racial purity and, his hatred for anyone he considered inferior.
So this wasn't just some random prejudice he picked up along the way.
No.
This was like fundamental to his thinking.
Absolutely.
And it's chilling, to see how these early views on race and nationalism, how they directly connect to, everything that came later, the horrific policies of the Nazi regime.
Yeah, and it's not just disliking diversity. It's about seeing a multi-ethnic society as fundamentally weak,
Mm-hmm.
And that idea fed directly into his whole concept of Lebensraum.
Right, the need for living space.
Exactly, the need for a racially pure German state to expand, to conquer territory.
Wow, so he's already thinking about expansion back then.
Oh yeah, the seeds are there.
And then, of course, you have World War I.
Right.
Obviously a huge turning point for him. He talks about his wartime experiences, praising the German army, but, he really lashes out at the political leadership.
He was furious. I mean, he really believed that the politicians had betrayed Germany, led to its defeat.
Right.
And he developed this real disdain for pacifist and Marxist movements. He blamed them for weakening Germany from within.
Hmm.
He was totally convinced that Germany needed a strong, unified national will, and he saw these movements as, undermining that.
And it's not like he was just observing this from afar. I mean, he was in the trenches.
Wow.
He experienced the horrors of war firsthand.
It was gassed on the front lines in 1918.
Wow.
Yeah, and he describes it in Mein Kampf in really vivid detail. It's a disturbing passage.
I can imagine.
And this experience, combined with all the wartime propaganda, it just solidified his hatred for those politicians he blamed for Germany's downfall.
It's like it just reinforced all of his existing beliefs, all that anger.
It fueled the fire, for sure.
So World War I was a turning point for him. It deepened his prejudices, fueled his anger, and really solidified his belief that Germany needed a strong, almost mythical leader.
Someone like him, he thought.
Right.
Someone who could embody the national will and restore Germany to its former glory.
So we've got a frustrated young Hitler in Vienna, shaped by prejudice and this yearning for racial purity.
Yeah.
Then we've got World War I, which hardens his worldview and feeds his anger.
Right.
But how does he go from disgruntled veteran to the leader of a political movement? How does that happen?
Well, that's where his experience with the early Nazi Party comes in, and his very strategic use of propaganda. That's a whole other chapter.
And a whole other conversation, but we'll save that for next time.
Sounds good.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Mein Kampf.
My pleasure.
And we'll be back soon to continue exploring this complex and disturbing piece of history.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, thanks for listening. See you next time.
Last time, remember, we were talking about how Hitler's ideology kind of developed, from his time in Vienna all the way to the trenches of World War I.
Yeah, it's really like we're reading the origin story of, supervillain, except, of course, this one's not fiction. It's real, and it's It's disturbing
Definitely disturbing.
to see how much thought he put into, well, building his movement.
He had a plan.
Yeah, he lays it all out, his whole vision for the Nazi Party, and it's clear he's not just some, some ranting ideologue.
No, not at all.
This is a guy who's a cunning strategist.
Absolutely. He understood that to really seize power, it wasn't enough to just have angry rhetoric. You need organization,
Yeah.
discipline, and a clear message that was, going to resonate with the masses.
Right, and people were, you think about the state of Germany after the war, people were desperate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, chaos, resentment.
Yeah, desperate for solutions, desperate for someone to blame.
And he was ready to provide those answers.
Yeah, even if they were built on, well, lies and hate.
Exactly. I mean, he was a master at exploiting fear and prejudice, tapping into those anxieties at the time and channeling them towards, well, a scapegoat.
And tragically, he found that scapegoat in the Jewish people.
Right. Yeah, we can't shy away from this.
No, absolutely.
Anti-Semitism is a central theme that runs through all of Mein Kampf.
It's sickening to read some of his rants.
It really is.
Blaming the Jews for everything, Germany's economic woes, the decline of morality.
It's just hateful.
Yeah.
And he didn't just dislike Jews, This is about demonizing them.
Right.
Portraying them as a threat, this parasitic threat to the German nation.
So we've got the ideology, the planning, the scapegoating, but how does he turn all of this into an actual movement?
Well, that's where his mastery of propaganda comes in. He wasn't just a believer in propaganda. He was obsessed with it.
He saw it as a weapon.
Absolutely. A way to mold the minds of the masses.
Create a following.
Yeah, almost like a cult-like following.
He talks about appealing to emotion, not reason.
Right.
Simple slogans.
Direful imagery.
Grand spectacles.
It was about bypassing critical thinking.
Stirring up those feelings.
And his rallies, they were carefully orchestrated.
Yeah.
Designed to create a sense of awe and belonging.
It was a show.
He used music, torches, flags, massive crowds.
Yeah, it wasn't just about the message, it was the delivery.
Absolutely.
The guy was a master showman, a demigod.
You had to work a crowd, make them feel like they were part of something, well, bigger than themselves.
And his skills as a public speaker, they didn't just appear overnight.
Right. He worked at it.
He talks about, how he honed his skills.
Yeah, he describes it in Mein Kampf.
Learning to captivate an audience, using his voice, his gestures.
The power of repetition.
Simple phrases, emotionally charged language.
It's all there in the book.
It's fascinating.
It is.
And frankly, it's terrifying to see how deliberately he crafted all of this.
Right.
His persona, his message.
Yeah, he was like a political marketer.
Yeah.
Building a brand.
Selling an ideology, and sadly, he was incredibly successful.
He was, and that understanding of propaganda, his charisma, the political climate at the time, it all came together.
Allowed him to build that following.
And ultimately to seize control.
Okay, so we've covered his early years, his ideology, his strategies, but there's one crucial element we haven't really touched on yet.
What's that?
His vision for the Nazi state.
Right.
The blueprint he lays out in Mein Kampf.
For a racially pure and totalitarian Germany.
And that's where things get really dark.
That's where we see the full horror of his ideas in action.
We've been through a lot, haven't we? From Vienna to World War I, his ideology, his strategies, it's like Mein Kampf gives us this blueprint.
Yeah, a blueprint for how he turned this vision, this twisted vision, into, well, a terrifying reality.
It's like we've been following this path, this path that leads straight into the heart of darkness.
And in this last part, I think we need to confront, well, the destination, right?
Yeah.
Hitler's vision for the Nazi state. It's where it all comes together. His obsession with racial purity, his belief in strong leadership, the propaganda.
You said before it gets really dark.
Yeah.
And knowing what we know about the Holocaust, World War II, I can't even imagine what he outlines for this so-called utopia.
Utopia. That's definitely not the right word.
No.
It's more like a dystopian nightmare.
Yeah.
Built on racial hierarchy, total state control, just complete disregard for individual rights. He really lays out this plan for a racially pure Germany, cleansed of anyone he considers, well, undesirable.
So it's not just rallies and speeches anymore.
No.
This is about actual policies.
Policies and laws.
Turning his ideology into law. I'm assuming the Jews are his primary target, but does he single out any other groups?
He reserves his most vitriolic hatred for the Jews, but they're not the only ones in his crosshairs. He attacks Roma people, Slavs, people with disabilities, anyone he considers racially or ideologically inferior.
It's a pretty broad definition.
It is. It's terrifyingly broad. Encompasses anyone who doesn't fit into his warped vision of this perfect Aryan society.
It's just horrifying, to think that he laid all of this out so openly, so unapologetically.
Right. It's a reminder that we can't just dismiss these extremist views as just rhetoric. I
Yeah.
mean, these ideas, they have consequences, devastating consequences.
And this wasn't some, obscure text.
Right. Mein Kampf was widely read in
Yeah,
Germany.
yeah, it became like a Bible for the Nazi movement.
Yeah, it shaped the thinking of so many people.
We touched on his foreign policy goals before, that whole idea of Lebensraum, living space, expanding eastward.
He goes into a lot more detail about that in this section.
Yeah.
He lays out his plans for territorial expansion, specifically targeting Eastern Europe.
So it's not just hating these groups, it's about actively displacing them, conquering their land.
Wiping them out to make room for his master race.
And millions of people paid the price for this twisted logic.
Yeah, the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of Jews and other groups deemed undesirable.
It all stemmed from these ideas.
It's a reminder that words have power. Hateful ideas can lead to unimaginable atrocities.
So here we are at the end of our deep dive into Min Kampf, and I gotta say, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. It's been heavy, confronting the dark side of human nature and the potential for evil that's within all of us.
It's not lighthearted material, that's for sure, but it's necessary. I think
Yeah.
Min Kampf, I think it gives us a window into the mind of, well, one of history's most notorious figures.
And while it's important to understand the past,
I think it's even more important to learn from it,
right?
to recognize those warning signs, to challenge hatred and prejudice and, well, to defend those values.
Tolerance, empathy.
Human dignity.
It's easy to feel helpless in the face of all this darkness, but knowledge is power, right? Understanding how these ideologies take root.
How they spread,
Right.
how they can lead to such suffering. I think that's the first step in preventing these horrors from happening again.
And we can never be complacent.
No, we can't. The fight against hate, it's an ongoing fight. It requires us to be vigilant and to speak out against injustice.
We can't be bystanders.
Right, exactly.
Mein Kampf, it's disturbing, it's challenging, but it forces us to confront some, uncomfortable truths.
About ourselves and the world we live in.
It's a reminder that the potential for both good and evil, it exists within each of us.
It does.
And it's up to us to choose.
Choose wisely.
Well said. Thank you for guiding us through this difficult but important deep dive.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
And to you, our listener, thanks for joining us. Stay curious, stay informed, and, stay engaged in the fight for a better world.
Until next time.